Real Al's clarity out of confusion. Alcoholism, dependence, alcohol abuse, alcohol misuse, alcohol use disorder, harmful drinking. Background. The World Health Organization definition of alcoholism is, quote, a term of long-standing use and variable meaning, generally taken to refer to chronic, continual drinking or periodic consumption which is characterized by impaired control, frequent episodes of intoxication, and preoccupation with alcohol and its use, despite adverse consequences. Unquote. It's interesting that the term variable meaning is incorporated within this definition, because one would have thought such a devastating disease would have consensus of professional understanding. However, that would appear not to be the case. Terminology in the United States. In the US, the term alcoholism has essentially been banished to the archives because it is considered unhelpful and a negative label. Since May 2013, professionals have preferred to use the term alcohol use disorder, which also incorporates the old term alcohol abuse. Alcohol use disorder is defined by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism as, quote, problem drinking that becomes severe, unquote. For the condition to be diagnosed, an individual must meet criteria specified in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now, anyone having 2 or more of 11 criteria during the previous 12 months receives a diagnosis of alcohol use disorder. Its severity can range from mild through moderate to severe, depending on the extent of the identification. For the 11 criteria, please refer to the text. Progressive confusion. Whilst the term alcohol use disorder has merit, it does complicate an already confusing state of affairs, and indeed, this isn't helped by recent research that identified 5 subgroups of alcohol use disorder that vary with age. Researchers studied people diagnosed with this condition, grouping together those who shared common symptoms as well as drinking to excess, and they came up with the following 5 classifications. 1. Alcohol-induced injury. People in this group engaged in risky behavior and got into dangerous situations that could cause injury. 2. Highly problematic with low perceived life interference. This group did not consider their alcohol consumption had any adverse effect on their lives or their family, work or social obligations, despite reporting many symptoms. 3. The adverse effects only group. This group only reported hangovers or alcohol withdrawal symptoms. 4. Difficulty cutting back group. This group struggled or were unable to cut down on their drinking. And 5. Highly problematic. The final group included all who had all the symptoms of alcohol use disorder. Researchers concluded that the adverse effects group and the highly problematic group were particularly prevalent among young adults, whilst the difficulty cutting back group and the alcohol-induced injury group were more prevalent as age increased. The researchers also stressed, however, that it is important to think beyond whether someone has an alcohol use disorder to which group they fall into, and therefore what aspect of their drinking they are struggling with. In my experience, this approach is fraught with danger because most excesses of alcohol that I'm aware of are already driven by craving, which is extremely problematic. Why? Because it undermines control over intake at any stage. So there is still much misunderstanding and discrepancy surrounding alcohol and how to name and classify the myriad of conditions it causes. Unfortunately, this isn't made any easier with the differences that exist between the US and the UK. Terminology in the United Kingdom. In Britain, alcohol dependence, alcohol misuse, alcohol abuse, harmful drinking are all still officially used, although I suspect the winds of change may see American terminology creep in at some point. At least in that event, there would be consistency and standardization for you, me, and the rest of humanity. It would be nice if there was agreed consensus on all aspects of this addictive drug. Sadly, as it stands, there is a significant catalogue of variation between public information messages on the net. For example, if you look at the DrinkAware website, they refer to alcohol dependence, sometimes known as alcoholism, as, quote, the most serious form of drinking problem, and describes a strong, often uncontrollable desire to drink, unquote. They expand on this by giving 4 warning signs and symptoms. 1. Worrying about where your next drink is coming from, and planning social, family, and work events around alcohol. 2. Finding you have a compulsive need to drink and finding it hard to stop once you start. 3. Waking up and drinking or feeling the need to have a drink in the morning. 4. Suffering from withdrawal symptoms such as sweating, shaking, and nausea, which stop once you have a drink. DrinkAware also defines alcohol abuse as referring to regular excessive drinking which has more tangible negative effect on people's lives. They add, while people with alcohol abuse problems usually manage to carry on their lives with some semblance of normality, in brackets, not so in my experience, close brackets, once dependence kicks in, the alcohol takes over. Confusion from different definitions and terminology. This is where it gets confusing, because if you look at the NHS website, what you find is their take on alcohol misuse, i.e., quote, drinking excessively, more than the lower risk limits of alcohol consumption, unquote. It also describes dependence as, quote, someone who has lost control over their drinking and has an excessive desire to drink, unquote. Compare this to DrinkAware's The Alcohol Takes Over, a strong, often uncontrollable desire to drink, and one is naturally left confused. Which is it? Is a dependent person or alcoholic someone who has an excessive desire to drink, or does the alcohol take over, resulting in an uncontrollable desire to drink? I would suggest, from personal experience, I never had an excessive desire or an uncontrollable desire to drink. What I had, as all alcoholics do, was an overwhelming compulsion that was beyond my control. My desire was to not drink. Clearly, my circumstances were grossly different to these official explanations. This is not a case of splitting hairs. I would strongly argue that there is a massive difference between any type of desire to drink and alcohol moving control to the point of compulsion. Desire doesn't come into it. If this confusion wasn't enough, there's also a different definition given by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, abbreviated to NICE, in which dependence is characterized as displaying 1. Craving, 2. Tolerance, 3. Preoccupation with alcohol, and 4. Continued drinking despite awareness of harmful consequences. Note, number 4 above is particularly disconcerting because it implies the alcoholic has some degree of choice over whether to drink, which just isn't the case. The problem with all these definitions is that they were written, I suspect, by people who haven't experienced alcohol-related harm in all its facets, least of all addiction. All of the official descriptions are unemotional, clinical, and minimalistic. Even the word dependence is misleading because it means different things in different contexts. To me, it conjures images of an infant, dependent upon its mother, which is a beautiful and natural aspect of nature. It also reinstates memories of my 92-year-old mother, who was dependent on me because of her dementia. Again, compassion envelops this thought. None of these automatic, alternative interpretations of the word dependence relate or describe the horror that is alcoholism. It is therefore arguably an inappropriate word to be used by professionals, unless There is a purposeful intention to play down or minimize the inevitable, devastating outcome of untreated alcoholism. You may well ask, why might that apply? Well, it's possibly because abstinence is the only way of dealing with alcoholism, and by and large, treatment agencies aren't good at achieving this. Therefore, demonstrating effectiveness as a basis for government funding is unlikely because prolonged abstinence is extremely hard to facilitate, and counsellors just aren't geared up or experienced enough in the main. It's easier for agencies to show that a client has cut down on their drinking over any number of weeks or months. A further possibility is that it's not financially beneficial to inform the masses just how common alcoholism is and the challenging nature of recovery. Indeed, few achieve long-term sobriety, relatively speaking. It's possible that there is a purposeful intention to keep the masses ignorant, thus transferring the blame for excessive drinking on irresponsible behaviour or personal problems. This takes blame away from alcohol as the source of a person's demise. I understand this conspiracy theory is open to criticism, but it's not far-fetched when you take into consideration the many high-level professionals medically esteemed that have resigned from being impartial advisors to government on matters relating to alcohol policy. Basis for many resignations has been the unhealthy, close ties government has to the drinks industry. Sir Professor Ian Gilmore, former president of the Royal College of Physicians, is the most recent example. There are others. Money, it would seem, has a very significant, pervasive influence on all matters relating to alcohol policy. Unfortunately, this is only to the detriment of public health. Real Al's alternative definition of alcoholism. From my experience and that of thousands of alcoholics I have met, I would take this opportunity to suggest a more accurate definition of the term alcoholism. It should be, quote, a progressive and fatal illness during which every waking moment without mercy becomes deadlier with the passage of time. Terror, despair, and bewilderment, three punishing collaborators, facilitate your descent into the zone of the living dead, from the depths of which you and your family will suffer the penultimate curse of addiction. Unquote. The point I'm endeavouring to make is that trying to understand alcoholism, addiction, dependence, alcohol use disorder, alcohol abuse, alcohol misuse, harmful drinking, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all is mind-boggling at best and downright impossible at worst, to say the least. I get frustrated with the establishment for apparently sanitizing terminology, which is why I'm compelled to speak out and tell it as it is, if only to help others avoid falling headfirst into Real Al's definition of alcoholism. Conclusion. It would have been beneficial for me to have just had one simple explanation, rather than all the complex variations described. That is why I have condensed all this confusing terminology into one sensible heading that I call the drinker's dreaded demise. Please don't concern yourself with complexities of official definitions. Do yourself a favour though and take a look at the following telltale circumstances. Note, you won't find these in any textbook. If you recognise or identify with any of them, trust me when I tell you that you're heading for trouble. In any case, if you're honest with yourself, you will probably already know whether something needs to be done. Should that be the case, please make use of Real Al's measures and steer yourself clear of harm. Symptoms of the drinker's dreaded demise. 1. When it's your round, grabbing a sneaky one at the bar before returning. 2. Pouring yourself a stiffer drink than you give your partner. 3. Using different off-licenses or supermarkets to avoid a reputation. 4. Hiding alcohol around the house, shed or garage. 5. Trying to talk on the phone like you hadn't had a drink. 6. Disposing of empty bottles away from home so clanking doesn't arouse neighbour suspicion. 7. Being more interested in the percentage by volume than country of origin. 8. mentally calculating if there is enough booze for you overnight. 9. Inability to walk away without finishing a drink. 10. Not caring how much you drink. 11. Using phrases like, I've only had a couple, just one or two, I'll never do that again. 12. Being quick to defend that you like to drink. 13. Being more excited at the prospect of having a drink than the social event. 14. Seeking out like-minded and kindred drinkers to the exclusion of others. 15. Switching from spirits to wine to beer, etc., in an attempt to avoid problems. 16. Finding excuses or justifiable reasons for excesses. 17. Assessing the value of things by how much booze you could buy instead. 18. Convincing yourself you don't have a problem contrary to others' opinions. 19. Encouraging others to drink with you so as to ease your conscience. 20. Thinking you're too intelligent, professional, responsible or mature to suffer.